Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webcast, JD Edwards HR and Data Privacy, Protecting Your Information. My name is Amanda Greiner, Marketing Coordinator with GSI. I'm also very pleased to welcome our main presenter, Dylan Connor, Solution Consultant for GSI and Security Fraud. Now, before we get started, I wanted to give you a chance to review our Safe Harbor statement. And now for a quick overview of today's meeting, which will last about 60 minutes. First, I would like to take a moment to go over a couple of housekeeping items, as well as provide a brief company overview. Then I will turn things over to Dylan to get into our main presentation, which will last about 40 minutes. Next, we'll take a minute to go over upcoming educational events, and then we'll wrap up with a 10-minute Q&A session. If you would like to submit a question, you can do so through the questions panel at the bottom of your GoToWebinar console window located on the right side of your screen. Please note that questions will be answered at the end of the presentation. So if you would like to minimize your GoToWebinar console during the presentation, just click the right-facing arrow key on the top left of the console. Clicking the left arrow key will return the console so that you can input your questions. And now I would like to give you a brief overview of GSI. GSI is a full-service JD Edwards consulting organization. We're an Oracle Platinum partner that was founded in 2004 and now has over 100 employees. We have offices nationwide and are recognized on the Inc. 5000 list of fastest-growing companies in the U.S. GSI specializes in project consulting, managed services, and cloud and hosting services, with all of our services backed with a 100% guarantee. GSI also provides a broad spectrum of business, functional, and technical consulting services for Oracle NetSuite, Oracle Cloud, Salesforce, ServiceNow, and other enterprise applications. In addition, we are a product development company that has many popular products, including Genius, which is our advanced monitoring and performance analytics solution for JD Edwards or any business-critical system on any platform. Genesis is our load and stress testing application for system design, validation, or expansion for JD Edwards or any web-based business-critical system. G Shield is our comprehensive security solution for JD Edwards, including password reset and two-factor authentication. Rapid Reconciler, which allows you to effectively manage your inventory, in-transit, and R&V reconciliation processes for any version of E1 or World. And Rapid Approval is a Salesforce App Exchange solution that streamlines the approval request process. And now I would like to turn things over to Dylan for a main presentation.
Awesome. Thank you, Amanda. All right, can everyone see the screen okay, Amanda?
Yeah, it looks like we're seeing the wrong
desktop
screen. Yeah.
I'll switch it over. All right, you should
there we go.
Seeing... Okay. All right, welcome to the HR and Data Security webinar. All right, before we get going on, Dylan, I'm a solution consultant with the Security and Fraud Protection team, and let's dive in. All right, so I've organized this into 3 different parts. We're going to go over the terminology, so we're all getting onto the same page. We're going to go over the implementation, and then the best practices. This is going to give you the necessary background information. It's going to teach you how to use all of the tools that JD Edwards has, and then we're going to outline an efficient strategy for how to secure your data. All right, so first off, we're going to go over some terminology that you may or may not be familiar with. Every single person that interacts with JDE, including your customers, your vendors, and all of the employees, have information about them stored in JD Edwards. We call this your personal identifying information, and it's stored in 2 places. It's stored in the address book fields and in your HR data. Now, your address book fields has a lot of information about you. It has your tax ID, sometimes it's your social security number. They have your home address, phone number, email, and you can define up to 8 additional fields here. So we'll go into those. All right. So address book has again, your tax ID, your address, phone number, email, a lot of information about you. The HR data can contain a little bit more, and it can be different depending on how your company uses JD Edwards. It can include your pay rate, your social security number, and it can contain insurance information. A lot of this information is obviously very sensitive and should be protected from people that don't need to work with it for a valid business reason. All right, the address book information is categorized per record into, by default, employees, customers, and vendors, but it also has a lot of customizable options that you can use. Each record, when you set it up, you have to enter a search type. The standard ones are going to be E for employees, C for customers, V for vendors. These are important because you can use these to limit the types of records that a user is able to look at and work with. All right, so I mentioned earlier that one way to control your personal identifying information, or PII, is by using permission lists. Permission lists block the ability to view address book fields, the ones that I put up on the screen earlier, for specified search types. So these are going to be different for each search type, and you can group them all together under one permissions list. The lists can be assigned to users or to roles, but only one can be active at a time. How JD Edwards decides which one is active is through the security hierarchy. So if you assign it to Star Public, which is possible, that will be at the very bottom and will only take effect if there are no other permissions lists active for that user. On the other hand, if the permissions list is assigned at the user level, it will ignore everything else below it. Roles are going to be kind of a middle ground, where the higher the sequence number is, the more priority that has to be used. All right. The other method to secure your personal identifying information is by utilizing data sources. Your HR data can be put into a separate data source, and by default, no one has access to that unless it is explicitly granted to them. This is going to be controlled through your regular user security program, OWSEC or LPSEC. All right, so now that we have all of the tools, we're going to learn how you can use those to protect your personal data. To have an effective data security strategy, to implement effective data security, we need to have a good strategy beforehand and stick to it for the duration of your security model. You might have a little bit different strategy than what we're using here, and those can work, but we found this to be an effective way of managing it. So first off, we need to create a baseline that's going to be granted to all users, and this is going to be your essentially denial. There can be other access granted within that, but this is approved and is set up depending on your needs. Any access beyond what everyone in the company needs should be granted separately. This makes sure that there's an accepted level of access for all users, and anything beyond that is granted with one, knowledge, so you know about all the access that's out there, and purpose, so there's no accidental access granted to anyone. All right, so here I've outlined all of the steps that we need to take to have an effective data security model, and then we'll go through each of these steps in more detail later on. For address book, we need to turn on the personal data security. We need to create the permission lists. We need to assign those permission lists to the users or to the roles. Either way is acceptable. And then we need to change the JDE INI settings to extend the controls across the rest of the system. By default, the address book data security only applies to address book programs until you turn on the INI setting. For HR data security, First off, we have to move the data into a separate data source. We're not going to cover how to do that in this module because it is too time consuming and could honestly be its own module. Then we need to grant access to the users or roles by assigning it through the program that we'll get to later. All right, so to turn on the address book personal data security is pretty simple. All you have to do is you need to go into the address book constants, that's the P0000, this form F, and check this bottom box. I blew it up a little bit so you can read it. It's the activate personal data security, and then you check this box and that turns the whole thing on. Now that you've turned on personal data security, we need to use the web client to create the permissions list. Now this only works on the web, it does not work on the FAT client. To do this, you are going to click the add button here to create the permissions list, and it's defined by search types. To edit it, once it's been created, you need to select the permissions list and the search type, and then click the row exit in the kind of inset window I have to edit the permissions list definitions. That'll bring you to the screen that's up on the right. It will, if you go through this way, it will automatically fill in the name and the search type, and you need to either check or uncheck the boxes to get the settings the way you want them. All right, now from the list definitions, once you set them up, you can navigate to the list relationships by using the row exit permissions list relationships, or you can navigate there using FastPath or a menu. If you get to there through the row exit, it will autofill in the specific list name and permission type that you had selected. If you get there through the menu or through FastPath, it will leave those options blank for you. To assign the list to a user or role, we need to select it from the column on the right in the main picture, and then click that arrow to move it over to the left, and that'll assign the permissions list to that user or role. One of the fun things with this is that star public is one of the places where you can store a permissions list. We're going to use this later on in our strategy to kind of create a baseline. All right, so now that we've set up our permissions list and the relationships, the system seems like it's secure and it's ready to go, but it's not. It's the protection at this point in time is limited to just the address book programs. So we need to go and change the JDE INI settings to enable the data privacy skip record. So this is directly from the Oracle website. It may have a different prefix before the INI for web versus FAT client, but the text here needs to be exactly this, and this will extend it anywhere that the fields occur. They are going to follow your permissions list that you set up. And this applies even in data browser. It's one of the only ways that you can hide data from data browser. Yeah, and if you don't do it, it leaves open those fields in any non-address book program. So if you don't do this, you don't actually have secured, you haven't actually secured your data. All right, now for the HR data, there's two steps, but we only have time to cover the second one. The first step is going to be to move all of the data into the separate data source. Their mechanics behind it are really complex, so that's why we're not going to cover it. And we're just going to assume that it's already been set up correctly. Now, once the HR data has been isolated in this separate data source, it's completely inaccessible to all users. What we need to do then is to grant it back. And we can grant it back through the individual user, we can grant it to all users, or we can grant it to a role. The other part of this is we do have to specify a system user. For this, we usually recommend either using the individual user or the role as the basis for the name of the system user, just so everything lines up a little bit nicer. There is an option to assign it to all users, but since we're trying to hide this data from most of the users, we're not going to check that box. All right, so now we're going to move into the recommendations and best practices. This is the fun part. All right, so we're going to start with the address book data security. We need to create a baseline level that's going to be effective for all users unless they have something else. The best way to do that is by assigning the baseline permissions list to Star Public. Because of the hierarchy, that will only take effect if the users don't have any other permissions lists active. So that means they don't have any roles that have permissions lists, and they don't have any permissions lists specifically granted at the user level. From here, we unsecure fields only if it's necessary for a business process. So for example, if you have an employee who is shipping goods to a customer, they're obviously going to need that customer's address and contact information. So for search type C for customer, you're going to make sure that their address, their phone number, and their email are unsecured for this permissions list for shipping. Another example, if you have a user in payroll that needs to send out physical checks, if that's the way that your company handles that, that payroll employee will need access to the employee's address to send the check. So we need to make sure that for that role, because that's what they're doing, that there's a search type that's created that allows visibility for the employee address. Another one for HR or master data management employees, they're going to need a lot more access to set up those fields to input the correct data. Now, the other important part with this is that because you can only have one permissions list active at a time, you need to have a strategy for how to assign those. If your employees wear a lot of hats, if they're working in lots of different areas, it may make more sense to have permissions list for each individual user. Because if you do it at the role level, they may be missing certain areas depending on the sequence of the roles. So by condensing it all into the user level, you ensure that the user has access to all the fields that they need. On the other hand, if your users primarily work in just one area, like your users only work in shipping, if they don't cover any other areas, then you can have a permissions list that's given to shipping roles, and then you don't have to do any setup at the user level. All you have to do to give them those fields is assign them the role. It makes it a lot easier to manage going forward. But if you do need that level of control, user level permission lists are the way to do it. Beyond that, we have a good model set up at this point. We need to turn on the INI settings to enable the skip record, and that will secure these fields anywhere they exist in JDE, including data browser. Now, the last step in here is to monitor your secure system. You want to do that with queries and watch lists. What these do is they'll just give you a notification, like on your phone if you have an email. If something changes, the query and watch list will flag it with just a number and tell you that something changed. From there, you can go in, see what changed, see if it was an approved change, and make sure that your system is still as secure as you designed it. All right, now for your HR data. The first step is to set up the data source. There's a lot of settings in here that can affect how this works. we don't really have the time to go over those in the session. Once that's been set up in the correct way that makes sure that the data is only in that data source, we need to assign that data source to users or roles that need the data. Now, this works a little bit differently than the permissions lists, because the default is a no. There's no record that's written as we'll go into how application security works. It's essentially the same. You can have a yes or a no with application security. If you have a no and a yes, and the no is higher in the hierarchy, you won't have access to it, even though you were granted the yes. Which is why the user level permissions lists take effect there. With this, there really isn't a no. So if you're granted access through your role, you have it. You don't have to worry about hierarchy or any sequences like that. If you grant access, you get it. Now, where you grant this access is the next step. You can assign it to users or roles. So you can simply assign the data source to all of your HR roles, or if you want a little bit more granular control, you can grant it to the users specifically. It's going to be a little bit more upkeep and a little bit more setup when someone becomes an HR person, and you can't simply unexpire the HR role if they move out of that area. You have to go back in and remove the data source from that user specifically. Again, with this, the really best way to monitor your changes is by using a query or a watch list. And this will catch any small differences that you have if anything changes. This is just a way to make sure that your ironclad system that you set up doesn't get any leaks in it. And then with this, and with the permissions list on the last slide, by setting up the baseline with the permissions list being what was designed versus the baseline with the HR data being you can't get to it. Any other access is intentional. You know about it, and it's approved. All right, so now that we've kind of run through the workings behind data security, I want to do a little plug about what our security team does. We can do let's go to the next one with all the information. We can do a security assessment just to see where you are. We will craft strategy, design your security. We do audit and SOX compliance. We will optimize your security to make sure you don't have any dummy records in there that are really just slowing you down. We can do a full service implementation of your security, and we can design, optimize, and automate your processes. We also offer secure care, so we will basically run your security for you based on your own strategy. And with that, I believe that is all of my slides.
All right, thanks, Dylan. I can take it back over.
Okay.
All right, so now I'd like to cover a few follow-up items and then move into our question and answer section of our webcast. So our webcast today was a part of GSI's free ongoing educational webcast series on JD Edwards. Our upcoming webcasts are listed on the screen, and to view our most up-to-date schedule, please visit getgsi.com/webcasts. GSI provides extensive free educational resources for the JD Edwards community, including our weekly educational webcasts, our monthly newsletter called the GSI Insider, our online resource center where you can access hundreds of recorded on-demand webcasts, white papers, etc., and our on-site and virtual workshops. If you would like to sign up for our weekly email reminders for upcoming webcasts, our monthly newsletter, or create an account to access our resource center, you can go to getgsi.com, go to Platforms on the main menu, select JD Edwards, and then select the appropriate link on the left. And while I see that we've already had several questions submitted online, I would like to remind everyone that if you would still like to submit a question, you can do so using the questions panel in the GoToWebinar console window on the right side of your screen. If you minimized your console earlier, please click the left arrow to redisplay the questions panel, and you can enter your question. Okay, so it looks like our first question comes from Terry. The question is, can you show in JD Edwards what the watch list look like?
Sorry, I didn't have any screenshots of the watch list. I know that there was a recent webcast done by someone else on my security team, by Kyle Gray, about UX1 and UDO security. I believe that was put out in the middle of last month, and he walks you through all of the processes to set that up and goes much more in depth.
Okay, thank you, Dylan. Our next question comes from Samir. The question is, how long does security assessment usually take?
A security assessment usually goes for a few weeks. I'm not sure on the exact numbers there. If you send me an email, I can give you that information.
Okay, great. So that appears to be the end of the questions. So thank you, Dylan, and everyone for your questions today. And as a follow-up from today's webcast, we ask that you complete a short 1-minute survey when you exit. You'll be receiving an email with a link to our resource center on our website where you can access the recording from today's webcast as well as a copy of the presentation. After today's webcast, we will do the drawing for the $25 Amazon gift card, and anyone who attended the entire webcast will be eligible, and we will notify the winner. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can contact Dylan or I, and we will get back to you. And our contact info is on the screen. And thanks again, everyone, for attending our presentation, and we hope you have a great day.